The man who destroyed France's entire economy wasn't a fool. He was a genius, a convicted murderer who escaped a death sentence, fled across Europe, and somehow talked his way into running the finances of the most powerful kingdom on earth. And the system he built to save France, paper money, a national bank, a stock market boom, is almost exactly the system your country runs on right now. It worked perfectly, for about 4 years. Here's how good it got while it lasted. For 1 year, ordinary people in Paris were getting so rich, so fast, that the language itself couldn't keep up. They had to invent a brand new word just to describe them: millionaire. Before this, nobody had ever needed it. Servants were buying carriages. People who'd been poor their whole lives were suddenly dining with dukes. And the man who made all of it happen had, a few years earlier, been sitting in a prison cell, waiting to hang. His name was John Law. He was Scottish, brilliant with numbers, addicted to gambling, and dangerous when his pride was on the line. In 1694, he killed a man in a duel in London, ran him through with a single thrust, and was sentenced to death for it. But Law didn't hang. He escaped from prison, slipped out of the country with a price on his head, and vanished into Europe. For the next 20 years, he made his living at the card table, winning fortunes by quietly counting the odds in his head, while everyone around him trusted to luck. But he wasn't just a gambler. He was studying something almost no one else understood yet. He had a theory about money, and he was looking for a country desperate enough to let him test it. In 1715, he found one. The Sun King, Louis XIV, had just died, and he'd left France in ruins. Decades of war and palaces had buried the country under a mountain of debt so vast that the interest alone was swallowing the kingdom whole. There wasn't enough gold and silver in all of France to pay it back. The new ruler, a regent governing in place of a child king, was staring straight at bankruptcy with no way out. And then a Scottish fugitive walked in with a promise. He could make France rich again, he said, not by finding more gold, by getting rid of the need for it entirely. This was Law's great idea, and at the time it sounded insane. For all of history, money had meant metal, gold, silver, heavy, scarce, slow to move, and there was only ever so much of it. Law looked at that and saw a cage. A country chained to gold can only ever be as rich as the metal it can dig out of the ground. So he asked a question nobody had dared to take seriously. What if money didn't have to be a thing you could hold at all? What if it could just be paper, a promise printed and passed from hand to hand? Print the right amount, Law argued, and you could breathe life back into a dead economy overnight. The regent, with nothing left to lose, told him to try. In 1716, Law opened a bank. It took in people's gold and coins and handed back paper notes in return. And here was the clever part. The notes were lighter, easier to carry, and the bank swore you could swap them back for metal anytime you wanted. At first, hardly anyone did. The paper worked. Trade sped up. The economy started to breathe. People began to prefer the paper to the coin. It worked so well that the regent made it official. Law's bank became the royal bank, its notes now guaranteed by the king himself. Law had done the impossible. He'd made an entire nation trust paper. Now he just needed to give them something to spend it on. He had a second machine ready. A company handed the exclusive rights to all of France's territory in America. A place called Louisiana, an enormous stretch of land along the Mississippi River, rumored to be drowning in gold, silver, and untouched riches. Law sold shares in this company to the public. Buy a piece of it, he told them, and you own a piece of a fortune the size of a continent. And then he wired the two machines together. You could buy shares in the company using the bank's paper notes. The bank printed the money, the company sold the dream, and the money flowed straight from one into the other, around and around. What happened next, no one had ever seen before. The shares rose. Then they climbed. Then they exploded. A share that started at 500 livres tore past 5,000, then 8,000, then 10,000, up more than 1,900% in a matter of months. And as the numbers screamed upward, all of France lost its mind. A narrow Paris street called the Rue Quincampoix became the beating heart of it, so crammed with people screaming to buy and sell that one hunchback reportedly grew rich, just renting out his back as a writing desk. Dukes stood shoulder to shoulder with their own footmen. People sold their land, their homes, everything they owned, to throw it onto the rising line. Fortunes were made in a single afternoon. This is where the word millionaire was born, and John Law became the most adored man in France. Crowds gathered in the streets just to watch him pass. But underneath the miracle, something was rotting. Because the price wasn't rising on Louisiana's gold, there was no gold. Louisiana was mostly swamp and fever. The riches were a story, nothing more. The shares were only climbing because more and more people kept buying them. And what were they buying with? Paper notes. And where did the paper come from? Law's Bank, which simply printed more whenever the price needed a push. Print money. Buy shares. Shares rise. Print more money. It was a machine eating its own tail. Every franc of new wealth was just fresh paper chasing a dream that didn't exist. And a machine like that only runs in one direction, as long as nobody stops to ask the one dangerous question: what is any of this actually worth? Then somebody asked it. A handful of the richest players, quietly, began to wonder whether the line could really climb forever. So they started cashing out, selling their shares, taking the paper notes, and walking into the bank to swap them back for solid gold, exactly as Law had always promised they could. But there was a problem. There wasn't enough gold. There had never been enough gold. The bank had printed far, far more paper than it could ever pay back in metal, and the instant a few people realized it, everyone realized it. The trickle became a flood. Law panicked, and everything he did next only made it worse. He used the full power of the state to fight the truth itself. He made it illegal to own large amounts of gold and silver. He sent officials into people's homes to hunt for hidden coins. He slashed the official value of the shares by decree, hoping to let the air out slowly, and instead confirmed everyone's worst fear in a single stroke. The paper they were all clutching was worth a fraction of what they'd been told. Panic curdled into fury. In the summer of 1720, the crowds flooded back to the Rue Quincampoix, but not to buy. They came to get their money out before it vanished. They crushed against the doors of the bank, thousands of them, frantic to trade their worthless paper for anything real. The pressure grew so violent that on one day, in the crush outside, people were trampled to death. The man who had made France rich was now the most hated person in the country. Mobs gathered outside his home, screaming for his blood. The shares became worthless. The paper became worthless. And John Law, once richer than the king himself, fled France in disguise, in the dead of night, with almost nothing to his name. He had arrived a fugitive. He left as one. He died 9 years later in Venice. Poor, still gambling, still convinced to the end that he'd been right, and in a strange way, he was. But the wreckage didn't leave with him. France was so scarred by what Law had done that the nation refused to trust paper money, or banks, for generations afterward. While the rest of Europe went on to build modern banking, France flinched away from it and stayed financially crippled, lurching from one money crisis to the next. Some historians draw a line straight from that ruin to the bankruptcy that, 70 years later, helped tip France into revolution. One Scottish gambler's experiment didn't just wipe out a generation, it left a wound in a country that took a century to finish bleeding. Now here's the part that should make you uncomfortable, because everything Law built, the thing they called madness, the thing that ended with bodies on the cobblestones, didn't disappear. It won. Paper money you can't trade in for gold, that's the cash in your pocket right now. A national bank that prints money to steer the whole economy. Nearly every country on earth has one. A market where the price of something climbs, not because of what it's worth, but because everyone's certain it'll keep climbing. You watch that with houses in 2008, with dot-com stocks, with crypto. The exact machine John Law built 300 years ago, print, buy, rise, print, is still running underneath all of it. We just stopped calling it madness. We started calling it the economy. Law's only real mistake was being 3 centuries too early, running his experiment too fast, on a country too small to absorb the shock. He compressed into 4 years what we've now stretched across whole lifetimes. The line still goes up. The paper still isn't backed by anything you can hold in your hand. And almost everyone alive is still quietly certain they'd be the smart one, the one who sees the crash coming and slips out in time. Almost nobody in 1720 was. So the only question that really matters is the one the people crushing against that bank door never thought to ask until it was far too late. What is any of it actually worth? And are you sure you'd ask before they did?